Do you need help?
They're taking away people's hopes and dreams and their self-fulfillment. I think self-fulfillment matters. I don't care if I'm the...
It's all about selling drugs.
The Everyday Psych Victims Podcast.
If you are a child, you better not smile, 'cause they'll take you to the quack, put you on legal crack. So if you are a child, you better not smile, 'cause they'll take you to the quack, put you on Prozac.
Welcome to the Everyday Psych Victims Project. Thank you for joining us, Robert.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
In your own words, what is post-SSRI sexual dysfunction?
It's an absolutely brutal syndrome where you just lose enjoyment and desire for that kind of activity. It's devastating. It's as bad as it sounds. I mean, it doesn't really get much worse than that.
How did you first realize that you have PSSD?
That's a really difficult question to kind of point down. I mean, I was originally given the medication when I was, 14, and I was really miserable at that time, so it was kind of difficult to tell if there was something wrong going with that. But where I really kind of figured out something had gone wrong was when I was 19 and I had all these, issues, and I kind of realized that I couldn't really just excuse it to problems with mood or anxiety, because I was feeling fine, but there's just this, these serious symptoms, and that's kind of when I started to worry about things.
How old are you, Robert?
I'm 20 years old.
How old were you when you were given PSSD?
Well, I kind of was experiencing some of the symptoms I'm experiencing right now when I was like 15. So, and it was kind of hard to pinpoint exactly, but I started to notice some serious problems at that point. So, yeah.
When did you come off the antidepressants?
I was 17 when I finally got. I think I tried to get off of them when I was 15 and 16 unsuccessfully. But I think 17 was when I finally decided, I'm feeling good. I don't need these anymore. And then I just stopped.
But the impotence from the drugs still remain.
Yeah, well, everything functions fine. It's just a lack of enjoyment and this weird, like, burning and numbness and yeah, so it's actually interesting you say that, because at 17, that's when I started noticing this, like, growing pain, and I just kind of thought, I just kind of ignored it. I was kind of like, it's just psychological, but kind of know now that it wasn't. So,
how has PSSD impacted your life?
It's really, really tough. I mean, I'm kind of trying to make a good life for myself, and that's kind of that's a bit of a problem. It's left me with a sense of emptiness and confusion and fear. It's horrible.
Were you informed about post-SSRI sexual dysfunction when you were prescribed it by your psychiatrist?
Absolutely not. I don't think she actually knew what she was doing. I was, my family kind of noticed that something was really off with me for about a month, so they took me to a pediatrician, and this obviously isn't their specialty. I wasn't worried about any side effects at all. She was just kind of like, well, I guess we can try this. We'll start you on a really, really low dose, and kind of see what happens. So, I mean, the intentions of everyone involved was positive, but things didn't go well.
Has your psychiatrist, psychologist, or any mental health professional reported the PSSD to any drug regulator?
No. I only saw the doctor that originally prescribed it twice. I saw her for the first time and kind of something was off with my mental state. And then we followed up with her, and I actually had an extremely serious reaction. I was put on a really low dose, and about a couple weeks in, I woke up with this sort of anxiety and agitation, and I thought it was just a bad panic attack. But looking back at it, I think it was akathisia, because I felt so horrible, and I just couldn't stop moving, and my parents just thought I was being a hypochondriac, and I thought I didn't know what was going on. And she was kind of like, well, you were on such a low dose, it's hard to see that was like caused by it. So we kind of, that faded away a bit, and we kind of went up the normal dose. But no, I haven't reported it to any psychologist or psychiatrist. I did a report to risk.org, which has been collecting these reports for years now, and I plan on reporting it to Health Canada. So that's where I'm at right now.
Have you received any compensation?
Nope. None. Nothing.
Has PSSD impacted your personality like many others with PSSD that have reported a type of emotional blunting called anhedonia?
Yeah. These drugs, they reduce your capacity for negative emotions, but they also reduce your capacity for positive emotions. So when I was put on the medication, years ago, I kind of noticed I was a lot less afraid of people, I guess. And I kind of lost a lot of the social anxiety I had, but I did notice this sort of blunting that, well, some of the symptoms of my depression are better, but some of them are worse. And now I just have this, like, if a normal person's emotional range is like a 1 to 10, mine's like a 4 to a 6. I'm very middle of the road. Nothing really makes me super happy or motivated. Or nothing makes me really sad. So yeah, I've definitely experienced that. And I should be more scared about how serious this condition is, but I'm not. I'm just blunted. It's really scary.
Has the drugs that you came off of, how long ago now did you come off the antidepressants?
Yeah, it was 2.5 years, something like that.
Has it affected your arousal?
Yeah, there's a lack of interest. Like, everything works, but it's not good. It's not fun or motivating. And I have no other medical explanation for it. Like, we've done a bunch of tests and they're all normal. So I know this isn't psychological.
So is it like for me, when I'm around attractive women now, even though I can get somewhat there with a lot of force, but I'm not. I don't respond to being around women.
Yeah.
That I did have.
I've experienced that. Yeah.
Is there anything that you want people to know?
Don't give these things to kids. Like, I mean, we have no long-term safety data, and all the animal studies have so many red flags that we're playing with fire. And I think people really need to know that this condition exists. And like all the clinical data, it doesn't really show an obvious benefit over placebo pills, and there's all these serious side effects. It's just not worth it. And I think adults need to be more well informed of these as well, these symptoms. But that's the main point I would make.
Do you think that you should have had a right to know, or should have been informed and asked if you wanted to be on antidepressants, if they had told you that they had been used on pedophiles to chemically kill them?
Yeah, I kind of wish I was informed. I was initially fine with the idea I had a friend of mine who was on the exact same medication, so that kind of created a false sense of, oh, this is okay, this is normal. And both of my parents had been on extremely similar medication that I'd been on, Cipralex. I was given Celexa. But I remember, reading online about all these reports about akathisia and, how dangerous this can be for young people, and reports of this condition, PSSD. And I remember talking to my parents about this, like, this is sketchy. Like, I mean, I want to get better, but this is a horrible idea. And one of my parents just got kind of annoyed at me and was like, Robert, these are safe medications. They've been around for 25 years. Lots of people have used them. Don't worry about this. And so I kind of just went along with it, and I noticed some improvements in my mood in grade 9, but then after that, everything kind of went into a downward spiral. So yeah, people aren't informed about this. Doctors aren't informed about this. We need to get the word out that this can happen, and just other risks involved too.
Is there anything that you want people to know?
Well, just the point I made earlier, I guess, don't give these to kids. That's the main thing I want the medical profession to know, because it's absolutely devastated my life. Things aren't very fun anymore.
Were you informed about the withdrawal? Was that communicated to you when the antidepressants were prescribed to you?
Absolutely not. No, nothing. I think my parents kind of mentioned it briefly, like you shouldn't cut these things cold turkey, but I wasn't really informed about it going into it. It was just like, he's sick, give him these. That was about it.
And so thank you very much, Robert, for agreeing to share your story with us.
Yeah. I guess if there's some points I want to make to any patients who think they have this condition, I would recommend they take part of the genome project that's going on. I think I was talking to you about that earlier. Just to see what genetic variants might be involved in this, and we could go forward and hopefully find something that is effective in alleviating these symptoms, right?
Yeah, precisely. That's a very important project to be involved in.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't look like the medical industry is going to take much responsibility. So if we can find something ourselves, and with all the knowledge and education that we have among ourselves to do something about it and not have to suffer with this till we die, then that would be a much better way to live.
That would be a much better way. And especially that we have the internet now, we can share knowledge about what might be helpful and communicate directly with medical professionals. And there's I've got the link right here. There's a researcher that's doing a lot of work on this. His name is Melkanji, or he's been doing a lot of work on post-finasteride syndrome, and he's starting to study with rats, trying to study PSSD and studying, what's going on in the brains of these, adolescents and rats that are given these drugs, because, they've seen persistent effects on courting behavior in adolescent rats given these drugs. So that's a really excellent medical model that we can look at. And it's likely that when we find effective things that might help post-finasteride patients, that could help PSSD patients as well, because they seem like very similar conditions. Like the side effects they describe are very similar to what we're dealing with.
How else has PSSD affected your life, would you say?
To go through that kind of thing at that age really messes with your head and your sense of identity in a way that's, I think, difficult for a lot of people to understand. To have that kind of transformation in your mental health and your physical health and have no guarantee of recovery and not really know what's going on when you're just a teenager, it's it's so awful. Like the second half of my adolescence, I was on fire. That's kind of the best way to describe it. I've probably lost 3 potential relationships because of this condition. I don't really know where to go in life. What's kind of keeping me hopeful is that there's a lot of people now who want to help. And my doctor, actually, the doctor I'm seeing right now, actually believes me that I have this condition, and she's been very helpful and supportive, and ordering tests and this kind of stuff. But my sense of identity is so screwed up, to change so much, and to have like that bombshell dropped on you, especially that now I'm in college and I've figured out I might have this diagnosis. It's really, really brutal to focus on my schoolwork and to try and maneuver life. I guess it's really alien and scary. I'm sure you can relate to that.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I still can't get my head round it, and I'm nearly 30 years old now, and I've been living with this for eight years now off of the medications, 8 years off of them, and yeah, I still have it. It's not going away anytime soon. I'm not in my early 20s anymore, but I still can't get my head round it, and the trauma is very traumatic too.
Yeah.
Even if it all went away today, it would still be a mission to get my head round.
Yeah, no, you're just kind of thrown into it. And the thing is that I was so unhappy when I got put on the pills, is that the scariest thing about it all is I don't really know when these serious problems started. Like, I can't give you an exact date. It was kind of a slow process, right? Part of me isn't furious that I was put on the drugs in the first place, because it was obvious to people around me that something was wrong. But at the same time, I'm angry about the lack of follow-up. I'm angry about the lack of long-term safety data. Yeah, it's frustrating and makes me mad. So, yeah. Another point I'd like to make is that despite everything that's happened to me, I'm not completely against the existence of these things. Like, they seem to have some biologically useful properties, right? They can help, at least adults. They can help severely depressed adults a lot better than placebo pills, and they have these useful kind of I'm talking about SSRIs here, these kind of useful anti-inflammatory properties and these kind of properties about helping neurons in the hippocampus grow, but then they have these other horrific effects on this portion of health, right? It's like 50% of patients develop dysfunction. Like that's such an unacceptable side effect for an antidepressant. That's the worst side effect you can imagine.
50% half
it's 50%
develop sexual dysfunction while on the drug alone would be a terrible thing within itself, let alone permanent sexual dysfunction once you've not taking the drug anymore. But I'm not too sure about those studies personally. I think it's got as much usefulness as any other terrible drug that you wouldn't recommend people to take to deal with their problems. Personally,
like alcohol or
cannabis. Exactly. And the only difference is that the studies that people produce say they can make a study and pretend it's 0.001 better than a placebo, and that it magically helps neurons grow in this place. I think some people have analysed some of those studies, and they've not reported the damage, or they've reported damage as regrowing of neurons, something like that. I think people like Robert Whitaker is one of those people that's analysed. They'll publish things in I think that might be referring to that kind of argument, but obviously it would love to be sold as something that's enhancing neurons, but people that propose cannabis as a wonder drug also propose the same thing. The only difference is who's selling it.
Yeah,
That's
no,
what I believe.
I agree with you. There's a huge financial conflict of interest with these kind of things. This is purely anecdotal, but I have a family member, and they have dealt with mood problems for a long time. They tried one antidepressant, an SSRI, didn't do anything. They tried a tricyclic, and they ended up in the hospital. That wasn't good. And then they tried a different SSRI, and anecdotally, it's helped them a lot. And I know that that's not a scientific observation. It's just recently they stopped taking it, and they ended up in the hospital in a couple months. And it's hard for me to look at that and not see a benefit in that particular individual. But I definitely agree with you that there could be a lot of foul play going on in the background, and I definitely believe alternatives should be tried first before this kind of intervention. And I know antipsychotics cause long-term decreases in brain volume, and that's not good. So
I know in regard to the person you know feeling better, feeling worse when they came off of it, as there was little published investigations on these kind of things, but is it possible, like you, that could be due to the withdrawal of it at all?
It doesn't look like it. He'll be fine for a few months, and then something stressful will happen in his life, and then he crashes. It's similar. Like I've seen it with my own eyes. It's similar to what happened to me all those years ago. And he has siblings that are the same, and his dad was the same. And
that drug gave him a boost for that time period.
It seems to do something positive for him. That doesn't mean I should have been given it or some other patients. Like when you give a kid akathisia, that's not a very good long-term depression treatment.
Yeah, I mean, many people would say that I believe people should be allowed to take whatever drugs they want, as long as they are informed of the risks and benefits.
Yeah.
If they're not informed, then that's not a choice of the risks and benefits. You can't weigh up the risks and benefits is something that is touted to people as a reason to take the drugs, but it's absolutely not informed consent if you're not choosing it.
Yeah, like that. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but there was this very coercive nature to the beginning of treatment. Like my gut instincts was screaming at me after a couple of days, like, this is sketchy. This is a bad idea. I should have listened to that, because there's this part of me that's thinking like, this doesn't sound like a good idea. I don't know what's going on here. Yeah. So that was very frustrating. And I'm currently taking a medication to try and fix what's happened to me, and I've seen very mild improvements. But I'd rather just not have been drugged in the first place and be healthy. I think that's kind of what everybody wants.
Yeah, I mean, I was in a seriously bad way when I was coerced and given these drugs, but I wasn't. Me or my family at 10 years old or any age were never informed of the risks or choices, or even that it's a drug. It was called a medication, not a drug. I mean, they could have chosen to take any other drug, which could have made me feel better, but I would have been entitled about the risks and harms in a way which I wasn't given a choice over. Which is fair enough if I'd have wanted to do something under knowing that it's a drug and
Yeah.
the risks, so the true, honest risks.
Yeah, there's something else interesting I kind of want to mention. There's this very simple theory about depression that it's low serotonin levels, and when you increase serotonin, that magically fixes everything. And then I've done a lot of digging around in the studies, and it's so much more sophisticated than that. Like before I got put on these things, I was this kid that got picked on a lot, and I'd always have my shoulders hunched over, and I was painfully shy and all this kind of stuff. And now I can be very confident and show off and be completely social, but it all feels like numbed out. It feels like I've traded one chemical imbalance for another, to use that, pharmaceutical term. It feels like my brain's just producing like inhibitory chill out chemicals, and nothing's really exciting anymore or enjoyable. So it feels like I've traded like one type of depression for another from that treatment. It's not good, if that makes sense.
No, if you had the choice on that before, then that would be your choice, but that choice was robbed from you.
Yeah.
I can totally relate to the numb bluntness. I lost the huge enthusiasm I had for everything before PSSD and the other harms from these mental health medications.
Yeah. It's it's like the drug solved some problems and then caused others, and I don't know which is worse. I honestly, I wish I could have gone back and just undo everything. Like I always think about going back and just saying no. That's the biggest mistake I made in my life. It's like the worst thing that ever happened to me was getting severely depressed, and the second worst thing that ever happened to me was getting treated for it, the way it was treated. That's what this feels like, and I'm living with the consequences of it 6 years later. So,
what do you think that if you could speak to them and they could listen or take power, what do you think, what would you like the mental health charities to do, the government to do, the psychiatrists to do, and the drug regulators to do?
Well, if I had ultimate power, first thing I'd do is audit the pharmaceutical companies, get their data, saying, no, this is public data, this is public domain now, you can't just hide this data from us. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of negative studies and studies that don't put a smiley face on their products. In terms of mental health organizations, they should be wary of this. I really don't think these things should be anywhere near young people. And if adults, and just to give the appropriate warning to adults, that if adults want to use this for help, they just know all the risks, right? Like adults can drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes, and they know the risks. They need to know the same thing for even not just SSRIs, but any pharmaceutical medication that could be helpful. Like my sister, for example, was prescribed a medication called Accutane, and it's used for serious acne. And she was only on it briefly, but it's been described to cause the exact same persistent dysfunction that SSRIs and finasteride cause. And she wasn't, as far as I know, she wasn't told about that. And Accutane's a pretty dangerous drug for a lot of reasons. Just like, oh, she has acne. Here you go. Here's this powerful drug that was used for chemotherapy. It's just ridiculous. We have to be so much more careful with what we're giving ourselves and our kids. I was given a drug that gave me akathisia and PSSD, and she was given this chemotherapy drug that just shouldn't really be used for severe acne. If you look at the side effect profile, it's pretty terrible. She was only on it for a few months, but those are some of my thoughts on that.
Thank you for sharing them, Robert. It's really important and brave of you to speak out, because it's very difficult for people to talk about such a difficult subject
Yeah.
in open. Most people would prefer to be anonymous. Well, they'd prefer not to be harmed and humiliated and indignified in the first place. They'd prefer not to be given PSSD in the first place without a choice. But most people would prefer to remain completely non-public about it.
No, I think our society is becoming more open in general, and I think it's important that people know that these problems exist. And I try to keep hope, right? That there's people working on this and want help. And I think the best thing we can do as a community is reach out to potential people who are suffering with this and get them to report it and talk about it. Because like the thing is, when I was 17 and I went off this medication, I kind of pretended I was feeling good, and I kind of was. And I pretended there's nothing wrong with my health, but then I was kind of faced with the problem head on, and I was kind of like, no, like something really, really serious happened in the last 4 years, and I don't know how to fix it. So that was a very shocking experience, kind of just came tumbling down. It's been rough. And hopefully that now that we have a bunch of people who know about this problem, who are working on it, we can find some answers in the future. And I try to keep an optimistic mind frame, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because the treatment had some positive effects, but it so wasn't worth it at all. Like, I wish I could go, like, I don't know who the normal me was meant to be. Like, that's a scary thing to say out loud, but that's what it's like, right?
Yeah, it's depersonalized me. It's
Yeah.
robbed me of myself. Other people don't recognize me, but I don't recognize me. And I tried to pretend it wasn't real for the first year or so of living with it as well, because I just couldn't bring myself to believe that it was possible, or that it had something so unbelievably and traumatic had happened to me and robbed part of my body away from me and my soul and enthusiasm with it.
Yeah, it's people in my personal life think I'm the best I've ever been. They're like, wow, Robert's so social now. Like, Robert's such a hard worker. You know, people think I'm just, my family and my friends around me think that I'm the best I've ever been. It's like, if they knew what my life was like in the last 4 or 5 years, it'd be so alien to them. They'd be like, wow, this isn't possible. This can't happen to people, but it does, right? Like, I'm so unlike who I used to be like. It's like the first 14 years of my life is one life, and then there was like 14, 15, 16, which were just horrible, and then there was 17, where I actually, despite probably having PSSD at 17, I actually had a really fun year that year, my senior year. But then after that, it started hitting me how serious the problem was. So it feels like I've lived 3 lives. That's what this feels like. It's really, I think, be really alien and difficult for a lot of people to understand.
Yeah, it seems that way. I'm not myself anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I work with kids that have severe disabilities, and if anybody did this to them, I would be very upset.
Yeah.
I work with severely disabled kids, and if anybody did this to them, I would be very upset. That would also be very wrong.
Right. Yeah. the horrifying thing is I don't even really know when this started. I just know 6 years later I'm having these serious problems, and they've been associated with PSSD. This is the scariest thing about it. Like, I entered that winter of 2012, and I never came out of it completely. It changed my life forever, and I'm dealing with the consequences today. So
hopefully people that are involved in that industry will listen to this and decide to take some responsibility and help sort out the a mess that none of it's not your fault, it's not my fault, it's not anybody's fault that wasn't told about it, and that was whether they're an adult or a child, and they were in a very vulnerable way when they were taken advantage of in this way. When it happened to them, they were one of the most vulnerables of society that this is being done to. The least able to protect themselves. So let's hope that people that have a duty to take responsibility and do something useful moving forward about it will do the right thing.
Yeah, there's about 1,000 lawsuits against Merck right now, the company that makes Propecia. I don't know if you've read up much on finasteride or the PFS community.
Yeah, I saw it's a similar action, serotonin,
androgens.
Yeah, and they have similar problems, very, very similar problems as PSSD. I've heard about that. We are working together may be useful, as we already are with the Genome Project, correct?
Yeah, that the communities have linked up, and the exact same problems have been described with Accutane. And Accutane affects serotonin receptors in the brain, and dopamine, like SSRIs, like finasteride, can lower free testosterone. Like, these are similar conditions. It's like something in the way the neurons are producing, neurotransmitters and androgens. Something's just getting messed up in that complex process.
Yeah.
There was a PFS patient who was talking to someone at a Harvard study, and they're pretty optimistic that they're going to eventually find some effective treatment, just with how medicine's going and stuff. Now there's attention being paid to this. Like, they were able to reverse, these researchers were able to reverse a PSSD-like state in rats. They took some pregnant rats and they gave them, I think it was clomipramine. It's like a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake tricyclic drug. And when the pups grew up, they had all these deficits in courting behavior and stuff. And then they gave them like dihydrotestosterone and estrogen, and that just fixed them for some reason. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody throw stuff in their body just because of one rat study, but it is hopeful that we can find out what's going on and do some tweaks here and find some help for this.
Yeah, there's a lot of advanced technology, and things must move very, very forward. They can definitely something be done about it. It's about the will, not of people to care enough more than anything, which is a fair enough responsibility. I believe. Don't get me wrong. Other people most likely will not believe such a thing, but I'm free as a human being to speculate and think. But I believe the biolabs and the laboratories that would create, they've been doing testing on reproductive drugs since like the 20s or the 30s. So I don't believe that the pharmaceutical companies completely did not know about any of this. I completely think with those biolabs and those tests they've been doing, that this is something that is there's a lot hidden that is not revealed, and they can turn off female reproductive when these biolabs were doing these because reproductive rights and clinics comes from the eugenics era,
Right.
and the biolabs of the that they use at the time, and they could turn off. That's how women take pills, the reproductive pills that a lot of women take.
Yeah.
They can turn on and off their hormone. They were testing all the hormones they can turn on and off. Like women can take a pill, and a lot of the time when they stop taking the pill, then they know which hormones, then they can get pregnant again. So things are reversible and hormonally reversible, and can be induced fertility wise both ways for women. These experiments have been done in biolabs on medical publications in the 20s and 30s, just the ones that were published. So I feel not so nicely about the drug companies.
No, I mean, I think they're a bunch of bastards working in there. There's a lot of money to be made, and if you have to lie about product safety to get money, they're going to do it. Yeah, on the top, you were mentioning hormonal contraceptives. I think I might have sent this to you in an email. In the paper I was reading about PSSD, they had women who were still experiencing problems after they stopped taking oral contraceptives, and they had these changes in the way their body was handling, estrogen, and it was due to epigenetics. So this might not just be antidepressants and finasteride and Accutane. This could be a bunch of drugs that are doing these kind of things to this aspect of health, and a lot of people may be walking around not knowing what's wrong. And I think it's 5% of people who are born today were exposed to antidepressants before they were born. And you look at the animal studies, that can cause a PSSD-like state. There could be 5% of people walking around with a mild form of PSSD and they don't even know it. Like, that's pretty scary, but that could be where we're at right now.
If this didn't start happening to me when I was a teenager or entering my adult life at 20, 21, and that stuff happening to my body, and withdrawal for me was very exacerbated and actually had persistent genital arousal disorder, where I was uncontrollably aroused and ejaculating until it went back to the deadening, can't be aroused anymore.
Yeah, I had withdrawal too, and I'm still dealing with like lingering symptoms. I remember I tried to get them off them when I was 15, I think, and I got these weird like brain zaps and sensory things. Yeah, these are lingering. I have this weird like burning in my fingertips and burning in my upper back and this light sensitivity. And if I'm sitting in the front of a car and I see the windshield wipers going, that annoys the hell out of my eyes. That was never there before I got put on these drugs. And those symptoms kind of come and go. Sometimes they're a lot worse, especially when I'm under stress. But these weird like burning in my fingers and my upper back and these bizarre sensory things that are really annoying and really distracting. So yeah, that's not pleasant to deal with at all. So there's that.
No, there's a lot of horrible lingering harm. I'm lucky that the brain zaps eventually went for me. They slowed down in severity after during the first year off of them. Towards the end of the year, the brain zaps started to dissipate, but gradually over time. I'm lucky I do not have the brain zaps anymore, if you can call that lucky or surviving that part of the car crash. That went away from me, but this is, if I wasn't young, if I wasn't 20 or when that happened to me, if I was in my 30s or mid-30s, which the majority of people that take these drugs are later in life, like in their 40s, usually women in their 40s, which don't necessarily notice their sexual organs are not and functioning is not as obvious to them as, let's say, a man who an arousal is pretty obvious.
A teenage boy.
Exactly. I would have
It's the
just
worst.
I would have just believed the doctors or taken their advice and just been like, oh, um, oh well, I guess this is just impotence and this is just normal, and I'll just take Viagra. But no,
Yeah.
so I knew it was very clear. If I was in my 30s or 40s, I probably would never even know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think the same problem. You mentioned how it's usually older people, older women in their 40s taking these medications with Propecia. One of the reasons why post-finasteride syndrome might not have been reported on for a long time is that the drug was originally used for enlarged prostates in older men, like men in their 50s and stuff, and they were actually taking a much higher dose. They could have just mistaken their depressive symptoms and their problems with functioning as just getting older, like, oh, I'm just less interested and things aren't working as good. But then they were giving 1 milligram doses to young men in their 20s for hair loss, and then whoa, like a small percentage developed these horrible symptoms that can't be explained any other way. So yeah, there's probably a lot of misdiagnosis and undiagnosis going on. People on the medication who just don't necessarily recognize it. And the thing is, I noticed some changes to my health when I was late into 14, but these drugs lower your capacity for negative emotions too. So it didn't bother me that much. It wasn't that serious at that point, but in retrospect, I should have been like, whoa, red flag, get off these things, right? This isn't healthy for someone my age, right?
Yeah, it's hard to know, because how are you meant to know when you're not told what the truth, if you're fed dishonesty about it? Would you join me in making a plea to all the numerous mental health charities that are out there big time, putting their face everywhere, a plea to them to do something to help us, people affected by the drug damage and PSSD in particular?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Mental health charities, please do something to support us and help us and campaign for our human rights.
Yeah. This isn't psychological. Rat studies don't lie, right? I mean,
right.
This is what happens when you give Here's a bet for any scientist out there. Get some adolescent rats, give them Prozac, give them Celexa, and then compare them to a normal group and see what you find. You're going to find differences in this aspect of health. There's probably 12 studies that have found the exact same thing. You decrease courting behavior and all this stuff quite significantly, maybe up like 40% less or 50% less. Like, it's a noticeable change when you give these medications to adolescent rats. I mean, that's not psychological, right? Same with what happens when you give finasteride to rats. You see the same depressive behaviors and problems with functioning reported by people with PFS.
Nope.
So,
and that can't be confused with placebo, like the benefits of psychiatric drugs.
No, the rats were scared of it. That's why they're acting funny. They're spooked. It's all in their head.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you so much for sharing